from Newark, New Jersey, and I'm the chairman of the People's Organization for Progress, which is a grassroots organization that works for racial, social, and economic justice, which myself and about 8 other veteran members founded back in 1983. So our all-volunteer, independent grassroots organization is about 30 years old. But I have been on this path of the struggle for social and economic justice since I was 17 years old. At the age of 17, I was the president of the student government at Arts High School, and there was a teacher's strike that year in 1971. It was the longest teacher's strike in the history of the United States. And we, the students, we weren't on either side, the board side or the teacher's side. Maybe if I knew more about labor history, I might have been more on the teacher's side back then, but they didn't teach us labor history. So our main concern was this, that if we missed 35 consecutive days of school, we wouldn't graduate. And many of us had already applied and been accepted at colleges. So we had a citywide student government organization called the Newark Federation of High School Student Councils. I became the leader of that group, and in March of 1971, I led my first march and sit-in at the age of 17. My principal, Teresa David, told me, she said, "Larry, if you take these students out of school, you're going to be expelled and you're not going to graduate." Now, I had already been expelled in 8th grade, so I didn't look forward to being expelled, but you know, you can't ask people to do things that you yourself are not going to do. So I stood outside the school at third period, 10:35 passed, 10:40 passed, nobody came out, sweat was pouring down my face. But about 10:45, the front doors of the school came open, and I would say easily 95% of all the students at my school marched out. And we marched down on the Gateway Hotel, which is still there. It is the Gateway Hilton, that's across the street from Newark Penn Station. That is where the board and the union were carrying out their negotiations. And 200 of us managed to get into the Gateway and take over the 6th and 7th floors of the Gateway Hotel. I think they called in every fire truck and every police car, because remember, 71 was just 4 years after the 1967 rebellion in Newark. So finally, the first black mayor of the city of Newark, the first black mayor of a major East Coast city, Mayor Gibson, he came to us and he said, "Look, if you guys leave, I will do everything in my power to bring this strike to an end." And so we did withdraw, and within several days, not immediately, but several days thereafter, the strike did end. And then about 2 months later, just before I was getting ready to graduate, got a knock on my door, and it was a fellow named Pete Curtin. Pete Curtin came to my house in the hood. He was from Boston, but he was brought down to help Mayor Gibson in his transition. And he knocked on, this white man came into the all-black ghetto neighborhood in Newark and knocked on my door. And he asked me if I would consider being a member of the Newark Board of Education. I was 17 years old. I wasn't even old enough to vote. In fact, my birthday wasn't even going to be till December of that year. I said, "I don't know, talk to my mother." And my mother said, "Well, talk to Larry." So I didn't know, I was 17, you know, I'm ready to go to college, everything is good. You know, the civil rights movement, the rebellions, everything was a little bit more open than it was today. I had been accepted at Princeton, Harvard, and Yale. You know, I was the state champion 2-miler. I was the president of student government. I was 7th academically in my class. Everything looked good. I didn't know, you know, so I said, okay, I'll do it, not really knowing what I was getting myself into. And so on January 1st, 1971, I became the youngest full voting board member in the history of the United States. And at that point, I decided to reorganize my student group, because the first lesson that I had learned in organizing is power concedes nothing without a demand. If you don't bring pressure, you're not going to get anything. You can talk to these people, You can reason with these people, you can write them, you can email them, text them, take them to church with you, but power only understands power. And the power that we have is in the masses of the people. The grassroots people. Occupy Wall Street calls it the 99%. We used to call it the working and poor people. You know, we used to call it the Rainbow Coalition. So I pulled together my student organization, and for the 3 years that I was on the board, we pressed to make educational reforms in the city of Newark. At the end, well, let me just say before the end, again, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. Newark was in an uproar, the school system was in an uproar. 90% of the students were graduating functionally illiterate. It was the largest school district in the state. And there were school board meetings literally every night. And I don't know about any of you, I imagine some of you in here have been in college and you know how difficult college is. So it was impossible for me to do my schoolwork and do my Board of Education work at the same time. So in November of 1971, I withdrew from Princeton University to serve full-time on the Board of Education. I was a full-time board member, literally. I could do that because I could live at home with my mother and I didn't have to pay any rent. You know, but had it been different, then I might not have been able to do that. So we were successful in getting some reforms in the Newark School District, but at the end of my term, Mayor Gibson, who appointed me, said that I was the worst appointment he had ever made in his 4 years. And that's because I didn't stop protesting. I didn't stop demonstrating. I kept leading marches. This time we would lead hundreds. I imagine they haven't seen anything like that since then. Hundreds of students attending Newark Board of Education meetings, signing up to speak, keeping the board there till 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock in the morning. You know, so they were glad to see me go. And to be truthful, I was glad to go. I was ready to go back. So I went back to Princeton. I was able to get back in. And as soon as I got back to Princeton, I continued my student activity. Back in that period, you know, there was a worldwide anti-apartheid movement. And in the country, there was a national student anti-apartheid movement. And we formed a group at Princeton University called the People's Front for the Liberation of Southern Africa. And our immediate objective was to get Princeton to divest itself from those companies and businesses that were supporting the apartheid, doing business with the apartheid regime. So we started very small. We had for a few years very small demonstrations. So the question then became, how do we get the majority of students to come over to our side? Because essentially we were a marginalized student group. As you can imagine, you know, most of the students at Princeton coming from the families of the people who sit on the boards of these corporations weren't really all that interested in what we were doing. So in my senior year, we decided to do something different. Having studied the civil rights movement and so on and so forth, we decided that we were going to engage in a daily picket of Nassau Hall. Nassau Hall was where the president's office was. And also Nassau Hall is a national monument. It was the provisional headquarters of the revolutionary government of George Washington. So we decided that we were going to picket Nassau Hall on a daily basis. And we started out with a handful, about 12. And it stayed 12. It stayed 12 for about a whole month. And other students, you know, you would think that the black students and the third world students would come right over. The majority of them ignored us. The majority of the white students ignored us. And many of the white students were even hostile. They would come by and throw their soda, you know, cup of soda. They'd throw their sodas on us, call us niggas and all that other kind of stuff. This is at Princeton. You know, this is in 1978. But a snowstorm came in March. It was the first big snowstorm. It was unusual because it was in March. And the 12 of us thought that the daily picket was doomed at that point. If we couldn't get the students to come out and picket with us in the sunshine, how are we going to get them to come out and picket with us in a snowstorm? But we went up anyway. And you know what we would do? They used to have these big garbage cans, these big green, they look like oil drum garbage cans. We emptied them out and turned them upside down. and we went and got broom handles, and we would be under the president's window drumming on these garbage cans, you know. And unusually, 3 students came, 5 students came, 10. See, we thought nobody cared, and we thought nobody was listening. And we thought mainly that because nobody joined us, that we weren't gaining support. But on that day, the day of the snowstorm, we had the largest picket, 110 students. They came to rescue us. They knew too that if this thing did not go past the snowstorm, we were doomed. And from that point on, the demonstrations got larger and larger and larger. And then in April of 1978, we had over 600 students on a daily basis picketing with us. So the lesson I had learned in high school was about pressure, and then the lesson that I had learned in college was about consistent activity. People got to see what you do. You can't assume just because you do one thing one time that everybody's going to know about it. You have to have this consistent activity. So on April the 14th, 1978, you know, they sent spies to infiltrate us, you know, and they heard that we were planning a sit-in at Nassau Hall. So Director Witzel, who was the head of security at Princeton, had a press conference with the Daily Princetonian. He said there will be no sit-in at Nassau Hall. So we planned our sit-in. We got some of the young white fellas to dress up like corporate executives and make an appointment with the president. They got into Nassau Hall. They got all the exit doors open, and we were in the classroom buildings close to Nassau Hall, and at the appointed time, we all ran over to Nassau Hall, and 210 of us took over Nassau Hall for 2 days to demand that Princeton divest. And they did divest. They only partially, they wouldn't give in to all our demands, you know, but they chose like the most egregious, the 2 or 3 real like corporate criminals that could not be denied, you know, and then they divested from them. Another thing I want to mention, one of the things that made that effort successful was that we had students who were really good at research. And one of the things you have to do with the adversary and with the enemies of the people's movement, because I know people don't like to hear those kind of words, adversaries and everything, but there's some real, we got real enemies. There's some real wicked people out there. Take 3 million people off food stamps. I don't know anything else to say but wicked. Take 50,000 children off Head Start. I don't know what else to say but wicked. Not give veterans the care that they need. After you send them to Afghanistan, they come home blown apart. You're gonna cut veterans benefit and cut the VA hospitals. That's wicked. To me, they're the enemies of the people, and we have to fight them. So the president of Princeton at that time, whose name was Bowen, he had a press conference. And he said Princeton had no ties to racist South Africa. We put those students on, the students who had all these research skills that they used to write their theses and write their PhDs, they applied that to the movement. Come to find out, Bowen is sitting on 4 or 5 of these same corporations that are doing business with South Africa. He was totally, we put out an alternative edition of the Daily Princetonian, put it under every dorm room door, and they took a poll on the university. 55% of the students supported divestment. So we had won over in a 3-year period, the majority. So one lesson is pressure. The other lesson is consistent activity. And the other lesson is to expose and discredit the people who are hurting us. They're hurting us. This is not a matter of a political fight. What's going on today is that people are being put in pain. People are being thrown out of their homes. Hospitals are being closed. Schools are being closed. Libraries are being closed. Factories are being closed. Workers are being thrown out into the street. I have never seen it the way I see it in the United States today. So after I left Princeton University, I came back home, and in 1982, I began to pull together some of those students who were with me when I was on the board. We had all gone to college. We had all gotten married. We all had children. And there's this kind of thinking in this country that if you go to college, you get married, you get a job, you get married, you have children, you can't be an activist. You don't have time. That's bull crap. You have plenty of time. You have plenty of time. And that's what's going on. If you got plenty of time to sit in front of the television all night, plenty of time to go to the club all weekend, you got time to get involved in the movement for social change in this country. You got plenty of time. People have plenty of time. So we said that even though we're grown now, we got families and we got jobs, we're still going to be activists, and we formed the People's Organization for Progress. Now initially, when we formed our organization, because it was a new organization, we did a lot of coalition work, and we did our work through other coalition efforts. Well, one of the big efforts still was South Africa. So whereas we had campaigned on campus to get our colleges to divest, now we were aiming at the state of New Jersey, to get the state of New Jersey to divest its pension funds from companies and businesses that were linked up to the apartheid regime. So what did we do? We had a sit-in on the front lawn of the State House. We camped out there overnight, and as a result of that action, Governor Kane decided that he was going to make some divestment of the pension funds from South Africa. So that effort was successful because we were consistent. And then on the electoral front, you know, the Rainbow Coalition was going on. We were working with that. We worked with Jesse Jackson, and that is how we really began to get a foothold in the community, because there was a lot of popular support for the Jackson campaigns, particularly in the grassroots community, for the campaigns of 1984 and 1988. But where our organization really started to grow was around the issue of police brutality. That's where we really began to establish, because up until that point, we were doing mainly coalition work. And you gotta do coalition work. That's another lesson of organizing. You gotta learn to work with other people. And a coalition doesn't mean a coalition of the people who think like you. You know, a lot of times these coalitions we form are coalitions of, yes, different organizations, but we're all people who think alike. A real coalition draws in people who may not necessarily agree with you on every issue, on every point, but you can find some common issues around which you can organize and around which you can work. But there was this issue of police brutality. There was a young man, April 11th, 1999, his name was Earl Faison. And Faison was going to see his children in the Orange housing projects. 2 days before, on April the 9th, a black female police officer, Joyce Carnegie, had been killed by someone, a motorist that she had stopped who had a gun and shot her to death. After that, the police in Essex County went on a wild thing. They had put out a description of the person who killed Carnegie, but they were arresting every black man, whether he looked like the killer or not. They had arrested, in fact, 4 people. In fact, the county prosecutor, and this is interesting dynamic, because at this point in Newark now, whereas in the old days we had apartheid and the mayor was white, you know, the city government would be mostly white, blah, blah, blah. But now, the mayor's black, you know, the county prosecutor's black, you know, just about everybody along the chain of command is black. You know, so Pat Hurt, who was a female Essex County prosecutor, she had no fewer than 4 different press conferences, each time announcing that they captured the killer of Joyce Carnegie, and each time being wrong. And so the Orange police stopped this young man named Earl Faison. And within 4 minutes of stopping Faison, he was dead. His mother and father came to us and asked us for help. The police said that Faison, quote unquote, died mysteriously. They had written in their report, they had written this down in their report, that Faison fell off the chair and died. You know, that he died mysteriously, that he fainted and died. His mother and father came to us and said they saw the footprints in his face when they went to the morgue. And they asked us if we would help them. So we came out to the police precinct. And this was controversial because, you know, the masses of people, they don't all think alike. There's a lot of respect for authority. and a lot of respect for the police. And something interesting happened. The day we were going to have the demonstration, that was the same day as Joyce Carnegie's funeral. So there was even a split in our organization. People saying, well, we shouldn't have the demonstration on the same day as her wake. You know, we should wait. And some people said, you know, what does it matter? This man is dead. We need to do something right now. There was a big struggle in our organization about this. So we voted to demonstrate anyway, but before the demonstration, I went to the wake of Joyce Carnegie. And I made sure, and I introduced myself to her family. And I made it clear that what we were doing was not against her. We just wanted justice for Earl Faison. You know, so we had the demonstration. The police director at that time, his name was Conti. He called me upstairs. He knew that I was the leader of the group. He said, look, Mr. Hamm, this kid, now Faison, 27 years old with children. He's not a kid, he's a man. He said, this kid, he's not a victim of police brutality, he's a criminal. You know, and then the newspapers, the media is part and parcel of the problem we have. The media is supporting the forces and the reactionaries that are hurting our people. Now, Faison, yes, he had been in jail, but he served his time. He's out. He was trying to reform himself. But you know what they would do? First of all, they make him look darker than he was, because to be black is to be criminal, you know, in this country, really. So he was a little lighter like me, so they had to darken his picture up. And then every article that would come out in the Star Ledger, which is the paper of record in New Jersey, would start out with the fact that he had a record. You know, the ex-con Earl Faison, they didn't say ex, but you know what, the ex-offender Earl Faison, blah, blah, blah. So everything was slanted in favor of the police. So what did we do? Taking the lesson I had learned in college, I applied it in Orange, New Jersey, and we had daily demonstrations at the police station where Faison died in Orange, New Jersey, on the corner of Tremont and Lincoln. These demonstrations got so big that they were doing police helicopter flyovers when we were having these demonstrations. When we marched from the police station to City Hall in Orange for justice for Earl Faison, they put the SWAT teams on the roof of the post office, and they were not hiding, dressed in black, flak jackets, automatic rifles showing. Now these were all mostly women and children, young men, nobody armed, nobody doing any violence, but they had the SWAT teams trained on us to shoot us down in the street if we were to do something they found that they didn't like. But we continue to press, and finally, and this is what happened again. It's a system that we're struggling against. The state of New Jersey was obviously inclined toward the police. Now, murder is a state statutory crime. It was up to the prosecutor, to the attorney general, to convene a grand jury and to bring charges. They wouldn't even convene a grand jury. They ended the investigation before it even got off the ground. So what do? Just like in the old South, you know, when we had to struggle against the local police and the state troopers, we went to the U.S. attorney, demanded that the U.S. attorney get involved. And he did get involved. And after a year of investigation, they indicted 5 officers connected to the death of Earl Faison. And in the U.S. Attorney General's own words, Faison had died in a stairwell of torture. So this is the other lesson you have to draw. You can't believe the propaganda of the people who are working against us. They have propaganda, and it is their job to make you think you're wrong. You have to stick to your guns and stick to the truth and fight for justice. And so for the first time in the history of New Jersey, 5 officers were convicted in connection with a police brutality case. 5 but they were not indicted on murder. They were indicted on conspiracy and on civil rights violations. So there was a trial. You know, it was like trick or treat. They convened a jury on Halloween, and there were no black people on the jury, October 31st, there was a black alternate, but no black people on the jury. We were almost certain that the fix was in before it even got started. But what happened? This all-white jury came back and convicted all the officers on all the counts. So there is some hope for white folks in the United States of America. So we thought we had won, right? So I'm driving down 280, going to one of my meetings, and I get a call from NJN, New Jersey Network News. They said, Mr. Hamm, what do you think of what Judge Liflin did? I said, what do you mean what Judge Liflin did? He said, Judge Liflin vacated the guilty verdicts in the Faison case. After these police had been convicted by a jury of their peers, this Judge Liflin, who had been appointed by Ronald Reagan to the federal court, vacated the guilty verdicts on a technicality. And this is the other lesson. Even though we might have allies and we might have folks and agencies in the government that might work with us, you cannot be dependent on them because they will cave under pressure. We went to the U.S. attorney, we told him you got to appeal Liflin's actions in this matter. At first they weren't going to do it, so what did we do? We went down and we protested, we demonstrated in front of the federal building, in front of the U.S. attorney's office. So finally they did appeal. And it was just like in the case of Amadou Diallo. When Diallo was killed in Brooklyn, instead of having a trial in New York City, they moved the trial to Albany, New York. In the case of Earl Faison, instead of having the appeal, not in Essex County, in the state of New Jersey, they moved it to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So what did? We got buses. We put people on the buses. And where did we take the buses? No, we didn't take them to Philadelphia. We took them to Camden, and we marched from Camden over the Ben Franklin Bridge into Philadelphia, into the U.S. Appeals Court. And we sat there, and the U.S. Appeals Court overturned Liflin's verdicts. And those officers had to go to trial. And it was really something to see, because one of the things that actually got them found guilty was the fact there was so much community pressure that even some of the police had to tell the truth. And they had like one police guy, he had to be put under guard for 20, now imagine this, he wasn't under threat by street gangs and drug dealers. He was under guard by the FBI because threats were coming from other policemen in the Orange police force. Because they thought there were going to be more indictments. One Star Ledger reporter told me that they thought there were going to be at least 19 officers indicted. Because what did they do? They came in, you're not supposed to touch a crime scene. They wiped up all the blood. They took the back seat of the car because they started beating Faison on the scene. They took the back seat of the patrol car out of the patrol car. They tried to get rid of as much evidence as possible. So this is the thing, the other lesson, we must mobilize, you must stay in the streets. Yes, we should meet, we should talk to people, we should educate people, but I'm telling you, the key component in America today, the key challenge facing all the people's organizations in America today, Grey Panthers, NAACP, People's Organization for Progress, is to build organizations that can consistently challenge the status quo. Our people, and when I say our people, I'm not just talking about black people. I'm talking about our senior citizens, our children, our veterans, our students, you know, our American citizens, 99% of them are defenseless. The best we have been able to do is periodic marches on Washington, which are good. I say go to all the marches on Washington. I wish I could have been at the one yesterday for the NSA. But see, the enemy knows. They know our number, as we used to say in the ghetto. We say, we got your number. You know, they know they're going to have a big demonstration in D.C. They're going to make a lot of speeches. They're going to go back home, and it's going to be business as usual. We have to build the kind of force so there's no more business as usual. That's the only thing that's going to bring about the kind of change that we want. America is at a crossroads, brothers and sisters. We are at a, you know it and I know it. We might not sum it up the same way, but this country is at a crossroads. We are either going to go forward and be a country that in fact will provide a better life for all people, or we are going to be a country that is going to be dragged backwards by some of the most virulent reactionary forces that I have seen since 1968 when Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. These people don't want civil rights, they don't want workers' rights, they don't want women's rights, they don't even want the New Deal. They don't want Social Security, they don't want Medicare, they don't want Medicaid, they don't want any programs that will make people's lives better. They want to bring us back to a 19th century laissez-faire, social Darwinistic dystopia in which they will benefit. But I don't know about you, I'm not going back without a fight. I'm going to fight for every inch of ground that we have. Thank you very much.
And the years you'll know, and the life you'll grow, got a way to go.